Terrans and Earthlings are caught in the middle of a psionic war. And it's more of being in the middle of something more than it is being the specific target of that thing, or that the agenda is against everybody or every person. It really is just that we're the battlefield, planet's the battlefield, the war is engaging psionically, and everyone's in the way.
How do you decipher that if it's, just through communication or there's an actual threat?
It's difficult to assess. We have a lot
I've seen that misinterpreted in the field many times.
Constantly, and that is because the nature of psionic warfare is to be evasive and to be confusing and to project illusory things so that it doesn't seem like you're doing what you're actually doing,
right,
or the attacker is wanting to not seem to be doing what they're actually doing or make it look like it's something different or something else. Psionic combat becomes very amorphous and very smoky, and it can turn into a lot of things and be a lot of different things. So it's tricky to sort out, for sure. It's very tricky.
So who are these opposing forces that we would be in the middle of this?
Unfortunately, it's the Neuschwabenländer Nazis and all of their friends against everybody else.
So more specifically, what does that mean, Randy?
The Neuschwabenländers, who are, leftover Nazis, are going to do like Nazis do, which is try to take over the world because they have an agenda in which they don't think that anybody else's ideas should be valid. They don't think that anybody else's genetics should be valid, and they don't think that anybody else's way of doing anything should be valid as well. So they have, through their own philosophy, wish to impose that upon everyone in the world, to have their vision of the world enacted, in which they have some friends and some allies, and to which everyone else is on the other side. So
those friends and allies are extraterrestrial or human?
There are some Terrans. And there's some countries that are supporting and going with that agenda. I don't know if I want to name names in this case or not, but there are certainly some extraterrestrial friends, but we're mostly talking about the separation between allied countries and a new World War III axis of evil countries.
So let's talk about this, the allies and the axis, and let's talk about who's supporting them, like with the extraterrestrial agenda.
Right. I would say that the earliest friends that the Nazis had were the Draconians, but as the Draconians have become less and less significant, they've become less and less of a strong ally. So really, I would say that their major ally that took over that role of the Draconians, as the Draconian Empire's influence here began to fade, was the influence of the Aldabarans. And so I would say the closest ET ally right now with the Nazis, with the Neuschwabenländers, are the Aldabarans.
So they're supporting a negative agenda.
Absolutely.
For our humanity.
Yeah.
Let's talk about their physical characteristics for the audience.
So probably take an average size human being. Mm-hmm. Most of my experience with them is dealing with males, not females, so I'm better describing a male physiology. So imagine a normal Terran male, but with less muscle mass on the arms, less muscle mass in the legs. See the bones in the chest, very little muscle mass, almost no fat tissue whatsoever.
Are they pale? Or what color?
No,
are
again,
yeah.
I would say almost similar, almost exact same skin tones and features as a Terran human, with this exception. So, like the face would be a similar eyes, nose, mouth, everything. From here, where my fingers are, back is like, if you were to just draw a bigger mound around someone's head that extended an extra couple of inches to the side, to the back, to the top, from here back, that had no hair and looked like you could see the brain through the top of the skull, but you can't. I don't know how else to describe that, but the brain size is actually quite large. They're very psionically developed, but my understanding is they are also a prime example of what happens when a civilization, species, chooses to go up the spiral of development and get to a certain point and then stop and get lazy. And then they started to devolve. And so my understanding is they're about 1,500 years on a devolution scale. So they have big brains and a certain amount of psionic ability that is still significant. But my understanding, it's a fraction of what it used to be. So they continue to get weaker and weaker and weaker psionically because they're getting lazier and lazier and lazier. So their goal continues to be enslave whoever they can to do all their work for them so that they don't actually have to lift a finger and use whatever power they have left to stop losing more power. And so they're not going on a good path, let's just say that. But they are at that point with what's a priority to them, willing to work with anyone that has a similar, fascistic, authoritarian designs.
Are there extraterrestrials that are trying to advance humanity and then these other opposing forces are trying to stop it?
Always. As I've pointed out many, many times, if this were not the case, we would have a world that was either totally great or horribly awful and not a struggle between the two. If the bad forces had no opposing force, we would all be chipped and, living in little tiny cubicles and, it would be Orwell's 1984, right? If the good people were totally in charge and had no opposing force to them, then we would be living in a fabulous world and everything would be great and there would be no problems. So the fact that neither of these things is true is how we know there is a conflict between these two forces. Because as long as there is a conflict between these two forces, we will see these things fighting themselves out. We'll know when one side wins or the other because then it will shift in one direction or the other in totality.